Morning, everyone, and welcome to our talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, recognizing and understanding it. We have with us, once again, Dr. David Pelcovitz has always made himself available to anyone who's doing cloud work. Doctor, I don't know how you find the time, and thank you for always being available. Dr. Pelcovitz, let's jump right in. I happen to have some questions, some specific questions, but can you just tell us, the big idea here is for us lay people to understand PTSD so that we can notice it in others. We better understand what we're seeing. I have a couple of questions, but please, I'd love to hear, you talk about it overall. Please.
Sure. So it's basically the overarching way of thinking about it. It's a normal reaction to an abnormal event, but there are very specific criteria that are, widely accepted as, suggesting that a person has a PTSD. They fall into the following areas. One is it can't be just any stressor. I remember when they first developed the diagnosis, one of the questions they had was somebody was taking a shower, a woman was taking a shower, and a hotel worker, a man, very innocently, didn't realize she was in the hotel room. She didn't put in the do not disturb sign. And this hotel worker comes into the shower to return towels, or, to give fresh towels. And she went.
You can imagine, of course, right.
And developed, seemed to have developed full-blown criteria PTSD. So the question was, do we allow, in quotes, can that be PTSD? And it was the whole debate about whether it could be called PTSD. But the bottom line,
for a relatively minor matter, like as I'm
relatively minor matter, and the way the maskana they had after decades of research was that basically it's something that where you have to be exposed to death, to a life-threatening experience, an actual or threatened serious injury. Okay, or sexual violence. There's something about sexual assault that is particularly associated with PTSD, as we know. And so it could be just witnessing the trauma, obviously direct exposure, even learning that a relative or close friend was exposed to trauma, just learning about that. Wow. If it's somebody you're very close to, that that kind of connection could make all the difference. Or in direct exposure to aversive details of the trauma, usually in the course of professional duties. So it could be first responders, it could be medics, it could be Hatzolah people, and it's not uncommon for years. It's not so much anymore because now OHEL does it a lot, and High Lifeline does it a lot. But I would often be called in if there was a horrific tragedy, usually one involving children, where there was loss of life. The Hatzolah workers would need an intervention also. After 9/11, they needed interventions. But again, it's considered to be a normal reaction
to an abnormal situation.
And then there's various criteria. So there's intrusion symptoms like unwanted, upsetting memories, nightmares, flashbacks. When we think about PTSD, it's what we usually think about.
Can I just ask a clarification that when you said intrusion was the word you used?
Yeah, so intrusion.
Meaning that it intrudes on the victim's life. Is that what you?
Yeah. And involuntarily, when you don't want it to, you have a flashback. It's the last thing you want, and it keeps coming back. After Meron, I worked with a number of people who were in Meron and were exposed to horrific things in that horrible tragedy. And the strangest things would might be able to trigger it for a while till they got better, because resilience is I'm sure we'll get to that. But it might be a certain smell, or it might be the weather on the day of a Mayron, or it might be being in any crowd, any of those things, might do it. Then people often will start avoiding things, like anything that reminds them of what happened. And then finally, there might be some like a traumatic amnesia, an inability to recall key features of the trauma, exaggerated blame of oneself or others, feeling isolated, feeling alone. It sometimes isolates you because you just don't want to be with anything or anybody that might remind you of it. So it could be a pretty pervasive kind of thing. But what is not this kind of PTSD related trauma we often are saying now, oh, a kid is traumatized because a kid in school is mean to him or her. Or we say, oh, a kid is traumatized because of what's really normal kinds of stress. I'm not saying that it's not incredibly impactful on the person, but in order to get PTSD, it has to have that life-threatening kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Which that, I'm wondering if that woman you mentioned with the towels, perhaps she was a victim of assault.
Yes.
Earlier.
Well,
Was there any, or is it just anecdotal?
No. I think that from what I remember back when they were, developing this aspect of the diagnosis, I think the hypothesis is that she had been a survivor of sexual assault. And, the very same thing could be incredibly devastating and, something that will trigger PTSD in one person and not others. And sometimes there's an incredible book that just came out earlier this year by one of the Gedolei Hadar in this area. His name is Dr. George Bonanno, professor at Columbia, a brilliant, brilliant man. And the name of his book is called The End of Trauma. And he brilliantly lays out how common resilience is. He did a lot of work after 9/11 with people. He did a lot of work after other major tragedies. And he shows that most people, as long as you have one person who cares in your life, and as long as you have people who help you talk about things and process things, it's true. You could have a horrific time initially, but usually after a month or two or three, people gradually start to get back to the new normal. He doesn't deny that there's PTSD. It's the way he makes his living. But, it's a fascinating book. We made it required reading in one of our doctoral programs because it opened people's eyes to this aspect of it.
The notion of resiliency.
The notion of resilience and the notion of what one of the authors in the area calls the magic of the ordinary. That
Right.
most people are pretty hardy, and as long as you have somebody in your life who really cares and is really there for you, and also, gives you a sense of hope and a sense of connection. Everything is connection, so you're not feeling lonely and alone with it. And if you have religious meaning and all those things, it makes sense. Did I ever talk to you about the 3 island studies?
No.
Yeah, let me tell you. It's a great way to understand.
Doctor, can I just, before you start, I want to hear about that very much, and I'm going to listen to the recording of this and order the book. Someone mentioned, I always ask people for good books to read on subjects that I need to know a lot more about, and they said The Body Keeps the Score. I understand that's like
he's a good friend of mine. So
really?
let me Bessel van der Kolk and I worked very closely together on writing some articles when after the DSM-4 PTSD field trials. So we worked very closely on the diagnosis called complex PTSD, which is what happens when you're still living in the middle of the hurricane. So you have PTSD after like a Mayron or after Ukraine, where there's this horrific event like an accident or a rape. Then there's PTSD. What happens when you live chronically with a horrific situation? So when you live chronically with such a situation, you develop a different constellation of symptoms. Okay, it's
Fascinating.
trauma as process, not event. So what you have is alterations in your emuna. Okay, that's where people lose their
We know
emuna
that.
after sex abuse in particular. You have alterations in terms of a damaged sense of self, a damaged ability to trust, to feel connected to others, and often somatic complaints. That's the body keeps the score. So can I give you a Pesach Dvar Torah? Is that legal now?
Absolutely, please.
Okay, because this is something that I learned so much from. Bessel van der Kolk was somebody who when I first met him, I was very nervous about Shabbos because I was invited to Charleston to be part of the planning team of developing the fourth iteration of the PTSD diagnosis. I was very worried about getting into my hotel room. I was just worried about, I needed somebody who understood Shabbos, and I'm in this totally. So who could be a bigger non-Jew than Bessel van der Kolk?
Right.
So right after our first meeting, he comes over to me, he says, David, you need a Shabbos guy? I said, what are you talking about? He made money growing up as being the Shabbos guy in his apartment building, where he used to go around putting on lights, shutting off lights. I think that the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim sold his chametz to Bessel van der Kolk.
Wow.
So but the story goes like this. Once, this is a great thought for the Seder table. He was a little nuts about trauma. He was just totally obsessed with trauma, very excited about it. I mean, really, this is his passion.
Comes across in the book. It comes across in the
book.
Yeah. He's brilliance and pulling things together. Oh.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's a wonderful guy, and he's a real lover of our people. So, we were working. He was staying in my house, and we were working on some articles based on what we found in what's called the field trials, where we went to 5 different parts of the country and we did different research to answer questions on fine-tuning the diagnosis. So one day he comes running into my office and he says, David, you got to see this. And he says, this is a picture of one of my patients who was stuck in the stairwell of the World Trade Center on 9/11. So he thinks like his life is about to end. He's having a flashback to the moment that he thinks is the last minute of his life. And he shows it to me, this picture of that fMRI, picture of the brain. What does the brain look like at the very end of its life? And 2 words ran through my mind, Vayidel Mara, because you saw Demimus.
Blank.
Brokaw's area, the language center of the brain, was totally shut down, totally silent. But then what he showed was that as time went on, as he gave this client of his, who happened to have been a psychiatrist, by the way, words for his pain and meaning and purpose, that's where the refuah came. So he lit up Brokaw's area.
Lit up that part that was down.
Here's where the Dvar Torah comes. Dvar Torah comes that there's a Haggadah called Mei Morom, written by Rabbi Charlap in Yerushalayim. It's Rehov Charlap in Yerushalayim. So it's actually my wife's family and my children are descended from this Rabbi Charlap. My mother-in-law is there. It's all that family. They were Talmidei Hagra, who settled in Yerushalayim in the 1800s. So here's what it says in Haggadah Meimora. It says, Avdus takes away our koach hadibur. It takes away our power of speech. And what will we be doing in a very short time on Seder night as we sit around the table with our family, totally surrounded by our family? What do we call it? Magid. Because we're lighting up the language. Our answer to suffering is to tell stories, is to teach our children, avadim hayinu. It's to light up the language centers of the brain. Okay, so which I find it so unbelievably inspiring to think about that, you know. So
And it just lets you know the power of community and the power of friends. How we think it, and it's also interesting because it's the speech of the trauma victim, right? Not the speech of the person listening. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
So it's
As
not
they talk about it, as they are able to share it, as they feel less alone and they feel somebody at their side, it makes all the difference in the
And
world.
when I interviewed you after the Walder incident, you were speaking about that we don't have to solve people's problems. We just need to let them talk.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
mentioned that parents shouldn't they should just listen to the children, and if you don't have anything wise to say, it's okay. You just listen. Look what the halacha is. You talk about dovetailing into the Seder night. Look at the halacha of Shiva. What are we supposed to do when we come to Shiva? Not everybody listens to it, but we're supposed to be quiet and let the person talk.
Yeah, right. And people have a hard time with that, not
Right. That's what I'm
understanding.
saying.
That's the key of the refuah, you
The
know?
key to the wow. It's fascinating. Wow. Wow. I'm gonna get I absolutely will get the book. So tell me about the islands you said.
Oh yeah, the three islands. Okay.
Please.
So a lot of what we know about resilience comes from, the purest form of research is longitudinal, looking at people over time. But ideally, if you go to an island, where it's a contained area, you're able to control in a very pure kind of way. So the three most widely known sources of our understanding of resilience are the three island studies. So one is in the island of Kauai. That's the best known study. In 1956, a woman by the name of Dr. Werner studied every person born in Kauai in 1956 and followed them into adulthood every year to see what's associated with doing well. And the study continues to this day. Okay. So
1956.
Yeah. And she followed them, and she asked the question, what are the core ingredients of resilience? And what she found, which was amazing to me, is, by the way, the other two studies were Martha's Vineyard, which we all
Another
know
island.
about, and the other is the Isle of Wight off the coast of Bournemouth in England, in the UK. And they all found the same thing, more or less. So in the Kauai study, here's what they found. They start following these kids from the very first hours of their life. And they were going to be raised in an area that had a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse, a lot of crime, a lot of poverty. And then they follow them into adulthood to say what's associated with doing well and what's associated with succumbing to the ravages of poverty and abuse. And what they found in all three islands is the following. Number one, they gave chen ratings. How much chen does this child have at the very beginning of his or her life? So they had public health nurses come and rate on a scale of, I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likable is this child? Okay. And they get it. And if you were rated high in that base, that, some babies, you just look at them and you love them.
Right.
Now, that's not very fair. I don't like it. But the question then is, and I spent a lot of time in terms of some of my research career, can you teach chen? Can you teach kids, this kind of these kind of abilities? And I really, I truly believe that you can. So one is chen, likability. The other predictor in all three islands was having one person, at least one person who cares. You're not just twisting in the wind.
That's what you said earlier, right?
Yeah, one person who cares. And the third is religion, meaning it didn't really matter what religion, but a real belief in some power greater than yourself. And you could even argue that you don't even have to be a mom. It could be just sort of feeling that you're not alone, feeling that that there's some meaning and purpose and a greater meaning to our life. And then my favorite one is something called required helpfulness, which is in all three islands, kids who are required to do chesed without overburdening them and robbing them of their childhood. So saying, okay, look, you're in this family and, things are pretty horrible, right? We'd like you to help take care of some of the more helpless members of your family. We're still going to make sure that you have time with your friends and time to enjoy life. And we're going to find you mentors and things like that. But we need you to help out. And in fact, study after study, after the Great Depression, right, in 1929, countered what everybody thought. The Bukhar, the oldest child in a family, okay, who you thought would have been the biggest messes because they had to give up their education, had to go and take care of their family. They did long-term into adulthood. They did better than anybody.
Fascinating, because they were out helping. So what's the logic is that it brings a sense of purpose to one's life?
Yeah.
Wow.
A sense of purpose, a mission,
Right.
a vision, meaning, all that. And I find that this stuff so important in life, just in general. So when our kids are complaining about, why do you ask me to do this? Or why do I have to take care of my younger sister? Or why do I have to help with chores and clean up? And the reality is it's the best gift we could give to our kids. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm still stuck with what you said about the deeper, about that, how talking opens up. And we know that this seems to be the best thing, not just listening to people. Folks don't know this enough. It's not taught enough. It's not taught enough.
Yeah.
So let me get back to the thank you so much for sharing that, Doctor. I always learn so much when I listen to you.
My pleasure. Same. Yeah.
So tell me, what should parents be looking for if they're concerned that something's not right with the children, or what should they be attuned to, or should they not worry about this because it's just so random? Like what does the average parent need to know about this?
Sure. You mean, especially if something, all of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren have experienced COVID, right? So that is a form of trauma. And there has been a tremendous increase in PTSD tied to that, and depression and anxiety and in suicidality and in abuse and all that stuff. So what parents need to know is if their child seems to have lost the spark in their eye, they're they're not themselves. Look, it's totally understandable, especially during times of lockdown, which Baruch Hashem is now getting less and less. But during times of lockdown, if our kids seem to be really different than they had been, but not everybody is going to be is a little bit more on edge, but in a way that interferes with functioning, in a way that they have symptoms that are persistent and interfering with major areas of emotional well-being, the ability to be happy, the ability to do basic work in school, the ability to have strong connections to friends. If that seems to really be gone and isn't getting better, and is more often than not, then it's definitely worth at least getting a consultation. Talk to your neighborhood mental health person. One thing our community has more than any other community around is plenty of mental health people. I hope. And if not, then we should always know who to ask. They're wonderful organizations. There's Relief. And there's a mood, and there's, we could just go on and on with the highlights.
So parents, if they see that the light switch go off, that would be like the most, that would be the most common symptom or something that a parent would see.
No, it would be a change in, it would probably be a change in general functioning, in the areas of your child seeming preoccupied, your child seeming just not to be himself or herself, So it might be in the area of work, meaning schoolwork,
Right.
It might be in the area of friendships, such withdrawal that they don't have any friends anymore.
Mhm.
Especially, since kids spent a lot of time behind masks
Alone. Right. Right.
and alone, and then they may have so gone into themselves that they don't have the healing power of being with chavrusa,
Right.
and the ability to play, to really play and have fun. It's an important part of life. Simchas l'chaim.
So if I'm understanding you, then if someone was previously a trauma victim, that time during COVID when everybody was in lockdown should have been the worst thing for them because they didn't have that ability to talk. Is that correct?
I would think so. And that seems to be, what my understanding is of the research on some of the long-term impact of COVID is, kids, many of them had real problems with math, with reading, things that are hard to catch up with. And those who before COVID had anxious temperaments or depressive temperaments that exacerbated it because you keep avoiding. And the only way to overcome that and conquer it is to avoid avoidance and
True.
to face reality.
Face what it is.
And that's why it's so important to try to get them back into a classroom,
Right.
not homeschooling and into a classroom. And
Now, I've been reading. I've been wondering about this. I mean, I read the first time I read it was a few years ago, but this this notion that ADD can sometimes can mask a diagnosis of PTSD. Is that a thing?
Yeah. I think it is a thing. It is the thing.
Because you read things and you look up some research and you never know. There's so much information out there that you don't know what's
hard to.
It was something that made sense to me. I remember being at a conference and someone was talking about again thinking about educators and parents to be able to look, kind of keep their eyes open and see if something's wrong. So they were talking about someone that a survivor has a hard time concentrating because their life is not in order, and they sometimes get very moody. So which describes some facets of ADHD, of ADD or ADHD.
There's something that's often referred to as like trauma-related ADHD. And one of the reasons it happens is our brains aren't wired to be chronically exposed to stress. We're wired to deal with stress like if a dog comes running at you and you do what you need to do and you go into fight or flight to protect yourself. That's okay, because then gradually things get back to normal when you feel safe. The problem is when you're dealing with something that's more chronic, like COVID had been. Then there's secretion of stress hormones like cortisol, bathing our brains in a way that works on the part of the brain that's involved in ADHD. That's what trauma ADHD. Literally, there are brain changes that include the re-experiencing of physiologic arousal and the avoidance. Literally, our brain gets primed to have this trauma-related ADHD. And the treatment is the same treatment you have in general for trauma. You have to treat the trauma. You can't only, by the way, those kids will respond to Ritalin. They'll respond to stimulants. It's not like they won't also respond to stimulus, but you can't let that be enough. Because if all you do is try to medicate it away by throwing some Adderall at them, you're not getting at the real underlying issue, which is the trauma. So you need to do the trauma therapy, and you need to do the ADHD treatment also.
Right. So if I can drill down there, that's what hit me when I read it the first time. That how is a parent to know if their child goes for testing? Let's say a child, for example, didn't disclose that there was childhood abuse. The kid's 15 years old. He or she are unable to succeed in school because they have this trauma that they're dealing with. So it presents as ADD. The parent hears the diagnosis and says, okay, we have ADD here. Let's do what we have to. How are they supposed to know, or how should they suspect that there's a PTSD lurking back there somehow.
I mean, because of abuse they don't know about.
Exactly, right.
Right, right.
That's how, because I deal in child safety, that when I read this is what I was thinking of. I said, if this is the case, so how are parents to know if they have what's presenting as ADHD, and the doctor, as you said, prescribes what an ADHD or ADD child would be getting, Adderall or whatever it is. How does the parent know there's something more? I guess that would be the question for a layperson. How would they know? Myself included in lay people.
Right. Yeah, but and it's such an important question. So that's why you need that's why my bias when you have a suspicion of a kid who might have been traumatized, who's also seems to have to have ADHD symptoms, but you also suspect that maybe it might be trauma related, especially during COVID, where everybody had the same trauma. So that's why I wouldn't only go necessarily to a pediatrician. I love pediatricians. Pediatricians write most of the prescriptions for stimulants, prescribed in the United States, I believe. It's always the primary care doctors, which is great, but you should also consult with a preferably it could be any mental health professional who has a specialty in trauma. So it could be a social worker, it could be a psychiatrist, it could be a psychologist. Very often people will go to a child psychiatrist then, because they have real, the child psychiatrists have the MD also. So they often have the best training in these areas. They don't necessarily have the best training in trauma. You want to go to somebody who has a reputation for getting it, and not forever. They could then consult with your pediatrician or whoever it is, or your primary care doctor to oversee make sure that there's the right kind of treatment as well.
And that there's no trauma, meaning to rule out trauma.
Either rule out trauma, or if there is trauma,
or if there is trauma, treat it.
To treat it, yeah.
As I'm saying, you would recommend that. I want to just make sure I understand. So your recommendation, doctor, would be that if a parent has a child that's presenting with ADHD and they're going to a doctor that's prescribing them Ritalin or whatever it is, or Adderall or Vyvanse, so just to be safe and sure, the parent should go for a consultation with a psychiatrist or somebody with an MD who can look and make sure that there isn't any trauma, or there isn't anything else that's driving this.
Yeah, and as you want to get a consult from somebody who has a specialized training in both ADHD and in trauma. Yeah.
Opposed to, if I'm understanding you correctly, as opposed to a regular pediatrician, as you say, right, who sees just the ADHD and what the teacher's telling and the mother's saying and prescribing something, but that doesn't necessarily have a background in trauma. This is very important. I never knew this.
Yeah, by the way, and this is what a primary care, in other words, I'm not in any way minimizing the core.
No, you're not coming across that way. Oh, no.
Yeah. I once wrote an article together with some colleagues on this. We showed in a very specific way, evidence and in a very comprehensively done study, evidence of exactly this, of trauma-based ADHD and what it looks like. And we submitted it to one of the leading child psychiatry journals, and they rejected it, saying, "This is so obvious. What are you saying that's new?" And your reaction here is saying exactly what we argued. People don't know this.
Right. I'm not a clinician. I'm not an expert. I'm not a therapist, but I deal with kids all the time, and it's so important that folks like me should know about this. I did not. I just did it.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, as part of my preparation for sitting down with you tonight, I was putting together some questions that I had about PTSD, and this one stuck out to me. So I said, I'm going to make sure I bring it up but I wouldn't even know this. This is one would think this should be something that people should know. Wow, it's really important, doctor. Maybe I'll I'm going to email you asking for the article, please, that you wrote. I'd love to have a look at it if that's okay.
I have to find it. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Doctor? I think I touched the bases that I was hoping to get from you, in terms of giving parents the information in a general sense, what else they should look for. And this question with the ADHD, which still has me a little, I really need to process that. Any recommendations you have for a parent that wants to read articles about this or wants to read up on PTSD?
Yeah, sure. In general, the most reliable sources of information come from something called the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. I'll put it just simply NCTSN, or the website is nctsnet.org. But you Google it, you'll see it. They are funded by the federal government and have some of the most respected, most evidence-based, and the biggest gedolim in the area of trauma, and they're particularly good at translating their knowledge in a way that they give it over to so they have fact sheets and tip sheets, and
Wow.
it's a wonderful site, and you could 100% rely on everything that they say.
That's good. That's very good.
That's where I would go.
I'm going to post it up. Dr. Hashem should give you wisdom and strength to continue your amazing work. Thank you for all the time you spent mentoring me.
You too.
And I'm always grateful for that, Doctor. Thank you for everything you do for the cloud. Be well. Thanks again for your time. Have a good night.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be well.